Hi, and welcome to another AustCham Beijing podcast. To hear more, log on to www.austcham.org.
Broached Retreat, a new exhibition by Broached Commissions recently shown at the UCCA in Beijing, brings bespoke Australian design to a Chinese audience. At the August AustCham Beijing Kooka drinks, Matt Contuzzi spoke to the exhibition's creative director, Mr. Lou Weis, on his unique exhibition and on Australian design in China.
So please tell us a little bit about Broached Commissions.
Broached Commissions is Australia's only limited edition bespoke design brand. And it was launched at the end of 2011 with an internal collection called Broached Colonial. And that collection was extremely successful. And it really launched the company. It attracted the attention of property developers such as Malongolo Group, who engaged us to do a commercial collection for them for a new 5-star hotel in Canberra and for their corporate headquarters. So it's been all guns blazing since our first collection at the end of 2011.
So your latest exhibition, Broached Retreat, has recently been on display at the UCCA in Beijing. Can you tell us a little bit about this exhibition?
Broached shows traditionally have been about the migration of design to Australia and the way that it changes when it arrives there and develops a parallel evolution to its original form, whether that be Deco in Paris or modernism from America or Chippendale even earlier from England. So when we were invited to do a show at the Ullens Centre for Contemporary Art at the UCCA here in Beijing, it was interesting to reverse that thinking and consider what happens when Australian people migrate to China. What is it that they bring with them when they establish their interiors here? And so what we did was we spoke to some leading China experts, Jeremy Barmay being one from the ANU, and he told me about the George E. Morrison Library and the fact that in the early 20th century, the adventurer and journalist George E. Morrison established what is still the largest Asia library in the region. He ended up selling it to the Baron of Mitsubishi, I think in about around 1914 or so, about 25,000 books, I believe, which are now near 1 million. So it is a still inexistent library in Tokyo. So the show is 3 rooms. It's a man's study and a woman's boudoir and a courtyard that they share. And so what we wanted to do was to investigate the idea of what a room of one's own looks like in a modernist house, in a modern relationship, at a time when people tend to share all the spaces in a home. We kind of imagine a luxury space where these people, both introverts, would retreat to their own quarters. And also the idea of the man's study and the woman's boudoir are these quite antiquated gendered spaces that don't exist anymore because they're a bit sexist. But we are quite different within a heterosexual relationship. We do want different things from our private time. And what does that look like now in a modern example? And that's what we tried to address in the exhibition.
So you recently spoke to Architecture AU about Broached Retreat, and you described interior design as a formal manifestation of one's identity. Now, does this kind of message resonate with a Chinese audience?
It's interesting. I was out for dinner last night and we ended up having a conversation about the passion that Chinese people have for accessories and in particular mobile phone cases and why it is that they're so ornate and so symbolic and so childlike and why the uptake of them is so massive. And I think that there is still within Chinese society a pre-modernist tendency to convey a certain disposition, whether it be childish or sophisticated or worldly, through ornament, whether that ornament be worn by a phone, by the body, or in the home. And so the interiors of Chinese homes, if you go through the pretty mainstream, dare I say, low-rent furniture malls in Beijing, they're filled with very dark timber, high-gloss, traditional, there's many different layers of traditional within the China, thousands of years of Chinese history, but this particular heavy furniture is still quite ornamental. So I believe that there is a very strong tendency within China of conveying a symbolic relationship to a certain conservative, small c conservative tradition. I believe that that's changing. I think that as China opens up, it is wanting a more light, modernist aesthetic that goes with all of the smaller apartments that people are now tending to live in. Also, I think what they've started to realize is that the Danish modernist furniture movement was deeply inspired by Chinese furniture. So the wishbone chair by Hans Wegener is that circular loop is inspired by Chinese chairs. And so that dialogue, Delft porcelain and so forth is ripped off by Chinese porcelain. So that dialogue between luxury goods from China then being replicated in Europe, now it's China's turn to kind of take back what modern luxury looks like, and I think they'll do an amazing job of it.
Now, why do you think that Chinese consumers are interested in Australian design and specifically product design?
When I moved to Amsterdam for a pretty amazing job back in 2005, as a teetotaler, I was hired to create a global vision for a chain of nightclubs based around the visual arts. Anyhow, when I arrived, I was introduced to some Dutch people, and I said to them, can you take me to some really great Belgian chocolate, because I'm a chocolate addict. And they took me to a store, and when I arrived there, it was called Australian. And I thought they were joking. I said, are you taking the piss? Like, what's this about? And they said, no. It's a really great chocolate brand, and it's all based around, they're inspired by the pristine nature of the Australian environment. And it really turned a light bulb on for me, which was that even though we have these huge issues in Australia of environmental degradation, obviously the degradation of the reef is a big issue at the moment, internationally, we are still known as a bit of a pristine wilderness. And I think that what Australia can sell through design is a relationship to a very earthy, wholesome, natural design. And that's a story that people want, especially, in a city that is blanketed in pollution, like Beijing, for instance.
So Beijing Design Week's coming up. Are you excited about the presence of the Australian firms this year?
Beijing Design Week is a relatively new design week. I think it started in 2009, but it should be one of the most important events on the Australian design calendar. And I think that the involvement of Neihan Li in particular, who's a designer that we've worked with, in the last 2 Beijing Design Weeks has really stepped it up a notch. And I think that as more and more graduates emerge out of Chinese and international design schools, and then those Chinese students who come back here to practice, it will become an incredibly important event on the international design calendar, and Australians should be getting in on that now. I'm not aware of exactly who's involved, but yeah, I think anyone from Australia who's coming over here and just planting the flag early on is doing a smart thing.
Lou, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. To find out more about AustCham Beijing or to listen to another exclusive podcast, visit www.austcham.org.